doing a game recap of our week 3 loss versus the Detroit Lions. A game that was, very disappointing and just kind of demoralizing to watch. They came in and just did whatever they wanted to against us. And, one thing that's been on my mind this whole week, you know, is it seemed like they wanted this game more than us. It seemed like they came into this game with a chip on their shoulder. They remember what we did to them 2 years ago, 38-6. And, they put their foot down and said that that wasn't going to happen again.
Yeah.
And they showed that, and I think from the very first drive where, they basically just marched right down the field on us, they were going to show that this is going to be a real game and they were for whatever. And they certainly were. And, from a defensive standpoint, just to start there and then I'll pivot to you, was not a great effort, and
Mhm.
after watching the tapes from this game, throughout the week, it's very misleading because it'll make you think certain players like Roquan or like Marlon was terrible, but I'm gonna just use Roquan for example. Watching the tape is kind of hard to grade him or rate his performance because, with some snaps, it seems like Roquan is just getting pushed away and it's just getting bullied. But if you watch it from like, an analytical point of view or like hearing the actual, professionals, how they describe it, Roquan doesn't even have a chance because of how the defensive play is designed against, Detroit's offense. Like there was this one play I was watching where Laporta, he shifts from the left side, of the offensive line to the right side, and that opened up a whole new lane for Montgomery, to run through when he ended up having that 75-yard run that basically, in my eyes, kind of iced the game. I mean, I was after that, I was like, okay, I don't know if we're gonna win that. And then just seeing Roquan, I mean, he couldn't even have an angle to tackle him because Penei Sewell was all over him. We need to get better at our defensive schemes, and I hope that Zach Orr has really been watching that because, you can't get outsmarted like that. It shouldn't take a player shifting from the other side of the offensive line to open up a 75-yard run. That's ridiculous. I've never seen anything like that happen to a Ravens defense over and over again, and it's frustrating to watch, and so I hope moving forward, we can really fix that because we can't, be susceptible to getting gashed in a run game like that because Lamar and offense is never going to get the ball. And I
Yep.
feel like that was the, major point in this game is the Lions offense did whatever they wanted to do. So when we finally got the ball back on offense, we had to do something. And there was a lot of times we weren't able to do nothing because we either got sacked, we got sacked 7 times in this game, or we had fumbles. Derrick Henry had a fumble. We just couldn't do nothing. So that's just my take, especially on the defensive side and how they made it even harder on the offense. So now I'm going to pivot to you. What was your reaction to the defensive performance in this game?
I mean, the easiest way to put it was putrid. I mean, it was pathetic. And I think that's been I kind of talked about that in our pregame video, how we really have not had the ball a lot offensively. We have a lot of three and outs. We have a lot of dud plays that lead to nothing. It feels like if the Orioles, the Ravens offense, doesn't get a big play on a drive, they're not going to do nothing on that drive. And I think that is a Monken issue. I think that's an offensive line issue, and I think that's a horrible issue. But I'll get into that in a second. But you know, um, the Lions came in and set the tone. They, like you said, they had a chip on their shoulder. They had a game plan. They executed their game plan to perfection. It was very, very little times where I felt like the Lions did something negative. There wasn't any close calls to fumbles or picks or whatever, but they did the reverse of what I said we were going to do. I said that we were going to have a battle through most of the game, but that we were going to pull away late. That's what they did. They came in. They were like, "All right, we're going to battle with these guys." And as soon as we gave them the momentum, they took off. And I mean, hats off to them. They had a game plan. They executed it. So I mean that's it's hard. Monday Night Football at the bank. It's our blackout game. There's a lot of momentum on our side just before the game even starts. But they came in first drive and we're like, we're not playing around here tonight. And it was very clear. And obviously we knew that this team was really good. I mean, they went what 15-2 last year.
Yeah.
Even with all those injuries that they had, to their secondary and their defense and everything. So, I thought that the defense played, very soft as well. It did not, maybe I'm not trying to say soft coverage. I'm just saying soft. It felt like a lot of guys were out there not trying to hit. Maybe that's just me. I haven't rewatched the game. I haven't watched a lot of film afterwards either, but it's frustrating. It just felt like
Yeah.
the guys were getting pushed around all night. I felt like every time I saw Broderick Washington, he was just he's like the flaily of the defensive line getting turned around like a turnstile. Like every time they showed him on the Jumbotron, he's backwards to the play. I'm like, what are you doing? This isn't a play action. Like you're not running play action like Lamar. Like get your nose in there. I think that was a terrible signing by EDC. A terrible re-signing, I should say, by EDC. Um, and I guess I shouldn't be dogging him. We're not going to have him this week for the Chiefs game. And speaking of not having people, not having Matabike, I think clearly showed
Yeah.
tonight, or on Monday night. Like it was just I don't know if you guys know the video of the security guy in the front of like the stadium, whatever. He's not really frisking anybody. He's just going like I don't know if you guys if you've ever seen that or if anybody's ever seen that, but that's what it was like tonight. No security, no defense, no nothing. We
Yeah.
had a few stops, here and there. We had that one stop. I believe the game was 28-24 by that point. We got a stop, we got the ball back, but then Henry fumbled. Like I mean Henry, what the hell's going on, man? Like this isn't you, and I don't know if this has to do with the lack of trust with the offensive line or whatever, and that's why we're running outside a lot. I don't exactly know what the issue is, but that just destroyed the game right there. Like I felt like even after the 75-yard run and all that stuff, I still felt like we had a chance. But that right there, I know they made it 31-28 or 31-24. We held them to a field goal, but they had all the momentum at that point. I mean, like we had to go down and score a touchdown now, to tie the game, not to take the lead. Excuse me, to tie the game. And we shouldn't have been put in that position. Like Henry has got to, like, I don't know what happened in between that fumble from Buffalo, and, the 3 quarters before that. Like he looked like he was unstoppable. And all of a sudden he looks like that's all he is stoppable. He had that one drive, Lions made adjustments, but he didn't seem to, and that's just what it was. And honestly, the frustrating part about it is, I've bitched about this for the last 2 years, us making videos. Can we find a way to slug our way down the field like how the Lions did? you know, and I just don't think that we can. I don't know if that's in our identity, to be able to do something like that. We've been destroyed in the time possession this year. How many plays? The discrepancy between the plays between the two teams or three teams we've played so far is like 70-50. Like that's our defense is out there too. Our defense can't get a stop, and our offense isn't on the field long enough to be able to give our defense a rest in the first place. I understand our defense was getting gashed all game, but at the same token, they're also not getting any rest. Part of that's their fault, part of that is their fault. But, sometimes your best defense can be the offense. And honestly, with the three bozos we have on the offensive line, it's going to be hard for us to kind of grit our way down the field like how I've been clamoring for the last few seasons. Opening up the short game for the Ravens. Have Justice Hill go on a wheel route. Maybe have him block for a second, then go out, for a pass or whatever. Give him more options instead of these long developing plays when you have to ask 77, 72, and 70 to block for long periods of time. It's just not realistic. And Monken, Harbaugh, and all of them have to understand that. And what we need to understand is we did not invest in the trenches. So none of this shit is surprising. The trenches weren't invested into. Honestly, it's getting to the point where it's like that Alexander signing is just stupid at this point because you had issues on other areas that were way more important. You can have all the shiny toys that you want, but it doesn't matter if they're made by some cheap ass material. Meaning that like I described it in a way where it's like, oh, you want to build a house, you want to build a house and you want to make it look beautiful. You want the best materials to make it, the best brick, the best windows, the best roof. But if that structure is weak, you save money. The house is $1 million. I want to cut $100,000 off of it. I'm going to make sure the structure is weak. I don't care about the structure. If we live in Baltimore, we don't get a lot of earthquakes. And then all of a sudden, guess what? We get the largest earthquake in all the time, and all of a sudden, freaking your house collapses. Because you had a weak structure. So this is what I'm talking about with the Ravens: is their trenches are piss poor. You're not going to be able to get to where you want to get to, you know, if you have this poor trench play, and it's too late for the offensive line, you can't just go ahead and say, "I'm going to trade for a guard." When have you seen that? And when has it worked? Because that's more complicated than trading for a receiver, trading for a cornerback or a safety or whatever. You can only hope that Matabika can get healthy. I don't know what the hell's going on with him, but you can only hope that he get healthy. But you're kind of stuck with 77, with 72, and 70 at this point. I think I'm going to give Rosengarten a pass as his second year, and maybe Voorhees as well because this is his first year starting. But I'm getting sick and tired of seeing 77 get playing ballerina out there. Like it's getting old, and like I said, it's your own damn fault. And if you don't invest in the places that can take you far, then I mean, what do you expect?
Yeah, and you hit every point on the nail there. We need to, find a way to make it work. It's kind of too late to trade for. It's not too late, but like you said, you never see a team trade for an offensive lineman mid-season, and it's like successful right off the bat like that. Like, it
Right.
takes a whole group, a whole unit of offensive linemen to have perfect chemistry together and work side by side, and that just can't be achieved in like a week. That's what the
Yeah.
whole training camp build up is for in
Yeah.
preseason. So
Yeah.
that's going to be hard to do. And, quite honestly, we probably won't do that. I
Hmm.
know we won't do that, but, just shifting to the offense here and talking about a little bit more positives, and then we can look at the stats. You know, I like, Lamar continues to, put this team on his back.
Yeah.
I think he played a great game. I saw a lot of people saying that, he held the ball too much and that, might have contributed to a little bit more sacks. And, I don't really agree.
Yeah.
When Lamar holds the ball, we've seen it many times where he's able to make a play out of it.
Yeah.
And that's just in his DNA. That's just his that's a part of his game. You can't just, expect him to take out a part of his game because, that's made us game winning plays before.
Yeah.
Him holding the ball, extending the play, that's him. And that
Hmm.
shouldn't he shouldn't be criticized or,
Yeah.
deducted points for that. And
Right.
so I think he played a pretty great game.
Right.
He had some dots to Mark Andrews, that one touchdown, where it was
Yeah.
you took a video of that. It was
Hmm.
towards the right side of the end zone. He had that dot to D Hop on the sideline. He had a dot to Devontae Walker and Terrion Arnold. That's a guy who I think we should have been attacking more in the
Yeah.
passing game, but we
Yeah.
didn't. I would have liked to see Zay attack him a little bit more, but overall Lamar had dots. And Derrick Henry too, I want to touch on him. He had that great run and at the first in the first half of the game for a touchdown. And then after that, he just was non-existent. And part of that was on our O line for not blocking well enough for him. But
Yeah.
he really needs to get out of his mind. I think he's in his mind right now when it comes to the fumbling, and he just needs to get back to old Derrick Henry because he never had these problems with Tennessee, but now all of a sudden come with us, they're starting to appear. He
Right.
needs to get to his old form, and it seems like it's always that same side that they're able to knock the ball out. He needs to, just I hate to say it, but he needs to just go over the basics again. So I don't think that would be a problem moving forward, but Derek is still a big positive on the offense, and he just needs to get back into his flow again. But this is still a high-powered offense, a high-scoring team. You know, I think we are going to be able to put up 30 points, maybe even 40. If we get the chance to. If the defense get off the field.
Yeah.
Each game. I really do feel like that. But we gotta have better offensive line play. We gotta attack weak corners more and exploit these
Yeah.
different matchups, and we can't get too cute in the red zone. What are we doing in the red zone?
Yeah. That was
These
pathetic.
tosses,
Yeah.
doing these plays where Lamar rolls out and tries to throw. It's nothing there. Just give the ball to Derrick Henry 3 times. If that doesn't work, do the tush push from Mark Andrews. It's that
Right.
simple. So that's really all I have to say. What's your thoughts on the offense? Just a couple positive things if you have any. Just to add on to what you already said.
Yeah, I mean, Lamar is always going to be a bright spot in the offense. Like it's very rare that he has poor games. Like I think out of 17 games in a year, he may have two poor games. In the season. And that's just how great he is. And to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying about him holding the ball. I mean, yeah, he could throw the ball away, but that's not his game, like you said. He's not immobile like, Jared Goff or, Joe Flacco or all these guys that you want them to throw the ball away because if not, they're going to get sacked. But sometimes you just have to give it up to the defensive front that they're playing. They tackle him where he can run, which is his legs. They had a QB spy. They were getting some pressure with three, which is insane. Um, you know, um, we can't even get pressure with four. We probably can't even get pressure with six, let alone
Embarrassing.
they can get it with three. So like I said, kudos to the Lions defensive front. They had a game plan on both sides of the ball. They executed it, and they knew they could dominate us on the trenches. But a big game for Mark Andrews as well. He needed a big game and he had one. It was his best game of the year so far. I believe he had like 6 catches for 90 something yards. You know, um, um, I think other offensive positives. D Hop continues to make some great catches.
Yeah,
Bateman had a good game as well. He had a few good catches on the sideline as well.
that's show.
So Bateman had a good game. That's pretty much it, man. I mean, like that's all I can think about right now, at least. Besides Lamar, you know, more. I mean, that one Henry, touchdown run. But yeah, that's really it, man. That's really it for the offense. There's a lot of work on.
Yeah, it's a lot of work to do, and I guess we can get into them stats now.
All right,
We just got to get better, Ravens.
all right, here you go.
All right. So starting off with our passing, Lamar Jackson, a very efficient 21 of 27, 288 yards, 3 touchdowns. Uh, you know, a Derrick Henry attempt, man, that makes me so mad even watching that. Uh, when it comes to our rushing, Derrick Henry had 12 carries for 50 yards, and a touchdown. That one touchdown run we talked about earlier.
Mhm.
Lamar Jackson had 7 carries for 35 yards. So again, I would like to see them Derrick Henry carries a little bit more. Just hopefully gets his stuff together. Moving on to the receiving. Mark Andrews has 6 receptions for 91 yards and 2 touchdowns. So a great bounce back game from him. I think that's a good sign that he's heating up, especially with Likely coming back. It's going to open up our offense a lot more.
Yep.
Rashad Bateman had 5 receptions for 63 yards and a touchdown. A sneaky good game for him. Justice Hill had 3 receptions for 45 yards. I saw he got like a third and 26.
Yeah, that was that last. It was like when we were down by 2 scores at that point.
Yeah, yeah. So that was crazy. That was like the Ray Rice 4 from 29. But well, let me not disrespect Ray Rice like that. But you get the point. But Devontae Walker had 1 reception for 34 yards. A great play on Terrion Arnold, which says a lot about Arnold because Devontae Walker is like our third or fourth string wide receiver. He's getting burnt on like that. But Charlie Kohler had 2 receptions for 22 yards, and D Hop only had 1 reception for 13 yards. I wish we got him a little bit more involved too. Zay
Yeah.
Flowers had 2 receptions for 13 yards, messed up my parlay, but I don't blame you, Zay. I blame Todd. But it's a cool. And then Derrick Henry had 1 reception for 7 yards.
All right. Obviously, the fumbles in the game from when did Lamar fumble? Oh, on
Oh,
the
and that
fourth.
one play when he
On
would
that, yeah,
backtrack. Yeah.
yeah. There's some plays where Lamar looks kind of stupid. But anyways, on the defense, or I don't know what you want to call that. Our leading tackler was Kyle Hamilton. He had 9 tackles. John Jenkins had 8 tackles. He had a tackle for loss. Teddy Buchanan had 8 total tackles as well. Malachi Starks had 8 total tackles and a tackle for loss. Roquan had 7 total tackles, a tackle for loss, and a QB hit. Marlon Humphrey had 4 total tackles. Um,
Trash.
yeah, he also, got burned probably like 7 different
Oh my
times.
God. Amon Ra. Oh my God.
Mike Green's had a rough rookie campaign so far. He had 4 total tackles and a QB hit. Broderick Washington had 4 total tackles. He left the game injured, I believe. TJ
Good.
Tampa had 3 total tackles in this game. JW Awuzie had 3 total tackles. Tavius Robinson had 3 total tackles and a QB hit. Tylan Wallace had 2 total tackles. Tylan Wallace. The fuck did he have more than Nate Wiggins? Anyways, Olave, no show away, had 2 total tackles and a tackle for loss and 2 QB hits. Um, he's not gonna be here for this year. Um,
Yeah.
Nate Wiggins had two total tackles. He had a great pass deflection. And I mean, Lamar had one. I mean, that's we don't really got to talk about all this, but when did Lamar get a tackle? Oh, I guess in the fumble.
Yeah.
But anyways, to move on to team stats, the Lions had converted 24 first downs to our 21. They had 11 passing. We had 14 passing. They had 12 rushing to our four. They had one pass. They had one down. They had one from penalties, and we had three. Excuse me. They were 7 for 14 on third down, and we were 6 for 11. They were 3 for 3 on fourth down. We were 0 for 1. 66 total plays to our 54. They had 426 total yards to our 318. They had 11 total drives to our 10. They had 6.5 yards per play, and they had 5.9. We went over all of this already. They had 224 rushing yards to our 85. They were 4 for 5 in the red zone. We were 2 for 4. They had 8 penalties for 68 yards, and we had 3 for 10. So we did something right, I guess. They didn't have a turnover, and we had one. Obviously the fumble, and they held the ball for 33 minutes and 18 seconds, and we held the ball for 26 minutes and 42 seconds. So not a I mean, 200 yards on the ground is embarrassing. You know,
Yep.
that's the easiest way to put it. You know, I'd rather get aired out than have because at least when you get aired out, you get a chance. You know, it's differences between the defenses between this year and last year is at least they got aired out last year to where the offense had a chance to come back on the field.
Yeah.
You know, and all we needed was just one stop in the air, one stop in the air. That's all we needed. But when you're getting, I'm not trying to sound weird here, but when you're getting pounded on the ground, like it's just hard to stop. You know, it's hard to just kind of accept. And it's just demoralizing. And that's what I mean. The Steelers said the same thing last year after the wild card game. We'd rather give up 500 yards in the air than give up 200 yards to the ground. Because it's just the truth. You know, like you know, like I said, Burrow was airing us out every single time we played him, but they were all quick plays, one play touchdown, one play touchdown, and we had the chance to go right back out there and score. But
Yep.
with these running plays, our offense is sitting on the bench, getting a chance to rest, which that's not really the offense's thing is the rest, and you sit there and watch the defense just get rolled over for 19 plays. I mean, they said that you know we haven't had a 19-yard drive that started from like the 1 or the 5 or whatever since 2001,
2001.
and that happened twice in that game versus the Lions. It's unacceptable.
We ever had a 19 play drive since 2001?
The meaning against us, I should say,
Oh, against us. Okay.
against us from the 1, or it was for like the 1 or like the 5 or whatever. It was like, but they had like 2 against us, so
Yeah.
that's just not that's not ideal. Um, but I will say before we close this video out, um, unless you have anything left to add, I'll go into the predictions.
You know, yeah, I wanted to say about those two 18, yeah, 19 play drives, those were embarrassing,
Yeah,
and I wish we would do something like that. And to be honest, I've never seen us do a 19 play drive before. I don't ever think we have done that,
I
you know.
think maybe with Roman we had a lot of long drives with Roman. That's the one
Oh,
thing Roman was good at was those long demoralizing drives. But
yeah, well, I feel like this. I feel like Monkey needs to, maybe take a page out of what the Lions did, and hopefully we could try to do that because we have the personnel to do that, and I feel like that would be a way to ease Henry back in, as well as
I don't
maybe a
know
guy
about
like
that.
Justice Hill. I don't know, since they don't
I
want to
don't.
give Mitchell a chance.
Yeah, I don't know what that's about. I mean, I do know what that's about, but I don't really get it. But I don't know if we have the personnel to do that, man. I
Maybe it
mean,
takes the right team to the
yeah,
right
like
matchup
maybe
to do that.
maybe next year if they revamp the offensive line, but I don't know about this year.
We'll get to them predictions though.
All right. Well, unfortunately, me and you both had poor weeks. There was a lot of upsets. There was a lot of that was kind of hard games to predict with quarterbacks out. But me and you both went 7-9 last week. So that's just yeah, obviously you're beating me head to head so far because you went 12-4 last week and I went 9-7. So you're still ahead right now. But I mean, who could have predicted the Browns were gonna beat the Packers? Like
I predicted that. You switched my answer. I said
no, you did not predict that. In fact, you probably would if you had the chance, you'd have been like, "That's a lock of the week," like.
that.
So, we both, like I said, we both went 7-9, unfortunately. But hopefully, we have a bounce back week 4.
Oh yeah.
One day I'm gonna make some kind of graphic that we can put up on here, maybe next season or later
For
this year.
records.
Yeah. So not good week 3.
Week 4 has some, easier matchups, so we're gonna get it done. Let's see what we do.
Yeah, it's gonna be upset central again.
They can't mess up my parlays like that. But I think this is all we got for this video. Just a game recap. A disappointing loss, but the season's not over. And we still got lots of weeks left, and we got a bye week. To get things sorted out. To get more healthier. But I feel like the best thing to do is just hopefully we can be 4-2 by our bye week. That's the best case scenario. Get Ricard back. Get some positive updates on Matabike, and maybe make a trade. For interior defensive lineman if we can get positive news on Matabike. But that's the goal now, and hopefully we can get that. So that's all we got for you guys today. This is Birds of Prey Sports. Make sure you check out our social medias, our TikTok, our Instagram, our Twitter. Also, make sure you check out our second channel, Casual Cinema. We are going to see him, we are going to see that. We're going to see that soon. So we're going to have that up there. We just got to, find a time for it. Hopefully that's movies worth our time. We've seen some iffy reviews about it, but, we'll check it out for ourselves and give it a review. So that's all we got for you guys in this video. We're Birds of Prey Sports, and we're out.
Right.